I am constantly curious about empirical information. I'm a pattern-seeking, though I hope not necessarily pattern-making, machine. And wherever patterns begin to emerge, I really do try to find out what might be the causality behind them. That, I think, is a very exciting and productive thing to do. I always assume there is a causality because principles rule everything. I always assume there is a causality because principles rule everything. I always assume there is a causality because principles rule everything. So, my mom was institutionalized, and I assume found to have mental problems, and she herself undoubtedly had a savagely traumatic childhood. I have no doubt of that. And worse things happened to her than ever happened to me, and so is your mother not off the hook to some degree in terms of moral responsibility, because she had a bad childhood, and therefore she is not responsible for the acting out, or less responsible for the acting out when she was an adult. And that's a perfectly valid and fair and also very interesting question. So we will attempt to tackle it. We'll just talk about generic mom. I don't think people need to know more about my mom. We'll talk about generic mom as a perpetrator of child abuse. We can, without a doubt, virtually be completely confident. Look at that. Without a doubt, virtually completely. We can be as confident as is really possible in the realm of extrapolating into human motivation. We can be certain that the abusive mom herself received abuse or experienced abuse as a child. So that's sort of number one. And the second is that no, let's just stay with this one for the moment. So the mom experienced abuse as a child, and then acts out that abuse against her children. Now, first of all, of course, I'm sure you're aware that this is not causal. It's correlational, but it's not causal. Insofar as there's not a one-to-one mapping. Not everyone who was abused as a child becomes an abusive parent. I, myself, would be an example of that. I mean, I scored a horrifying 8 out of 10 on the Adverse Childhood Experiences score, and so I should have had a 35% chance of lifetime of attempted suicide. I should have a much, much higher risk of depression and substance abuse and so on. But I like to think that the enormous amount of work that I've done on myself with the help of philosophy and the wisdom of psychological theories inherited from the very bright sparks of humanity has done its work, and that I have not this compulsion to repeat earlier abuse, but instead have turned the evil that I experienced into, I hope, a virtue by becoming a better parent through self-knowledge and through the acquisition of the scant and scarce resource of love in the abused child's world and the abused adult's world. So it's not causal for sure. So it's not for sure that, right? So there's some other factor at work, and so it can't be that somebody is pushed off a cliff, they fall involuntarily. That is a one-to-one, right? There's nobody who gets pushed off a cliff who flies. So that's a one-to-one causality. But it is not the case that those who are abused as children abuse in turn. And it is easy to ascribe this to the mystery X factor of choice, but there really is no other particular way to explain it that I know of. And I know that choice is not always a particularly compelling explanation, because it is an X factor. Why is it that somebody makes a choice to deal with abuse and not reenact it, and why does somebody take, to me, this sleazy, easy, cheap, and vile route of reenacting their own abuse on their children in order to avoid the pain of dealing with personal history? Why does that occur? Well, I'm going to put it down to the mystery of choice. Maybe it's causal, maybe it's not. But of course, the issue becomes if causality is brought into play, right? Here's the challenge. If we say, like somebody who says to me, Steph, you shouldn't judge your mother harshly because she was out of control. She experienced too much abuse and blah, blah, blah. Well, the problem then becomes one of turtles all the way down, or infinite regression, because If my mother is not responsible for her harsh judgment of me as a child, because of her history of abuse, then surely I am not responsible for my harsh judgment of my mother as an adult, if you could judge it to be harsh, because of my history of abuse.
Repetitive and exhausting, like the free will versus determinist debate, finally figuring out, like I just like, no matter how many times I explain a rational position, it's not listened to.
I always assume there is a causality because principles rule everything. Now, first of all, of course, I'm sure you're aware that this is not causal. So it's not causal for sure. Well, I'm going to put it down to the mystery of choice. Maybe it's causal, maybe it's not.
Yeah. Now, I think the first step is the real step. The step that gets out of bed in the morning and says, "I'm gonna drill down for causes, and I'm not gonna be stopped by anything." And because if you, after 1500 podcasts of digging for the roots of evil, and if you arrived in it, it is caused by the mystery X factor, and you cannot look behind X. It's a dead end. Then he will be understating his own achievements, which in my opinion are still considerable. I learned really a lot from Stefan Molyneux, and I would recommend others to listen to his stuff as well. But he runs into this dead end, trying to look for the causes of evil when it concerns his mother, and in my opinion this is caused by trauma. And his rational brain shuts down and inconsistencies come out. Um, Not even if he tries to look at mothers in general. This is why he accused the determinists of contradicting themselves, and why he lost all respect for determinists who say that everything has multiple causes. And because he becomes inconsistent himself, he is unaware of it and he projects it onto others. Now, it is wrong, but it's understandably so because of the trauma. I mean, it's like a kid who gets at school the first day and he is told that 1 plus 1 is 3. And if he then is asked how much is 1 plus 1, he will answer with 3. The answer is wrong, but it is understandably that he gave that answer. Also, I think in this case, it is wrong, it is inconsistent, it is understandably so that he gets confused around his trauma. But understandably or not, this is a problem when you debate people on principle. I mean, Jan Helvelt grills politicians on debating on principle and then drops the ball in a debate on anarchism, where he brings in fear-mongering with tanks in the street if there would be no government. And many atheists grill theists on principle and drop the ball on statism. And Ayn Rand drops the ball with minarchism and free will, and Stefan drops it with free will. And I wonder, until what point was there a real probability, say, that Ayn Rand converged to anarchism? I mean, when Roy Childs wrote the open letter to Ayn Rand about free market anarchism, that it was more consistent, was there still a chance she could be converted? To see the inconsistency that some men ought to be ruled over by others is not very likely, I think. Judging from the open letter format, it was already a lost cause. And I have to think of a story from the Bible I heard as a kid about Moses walking with the Jews through the desert for 40 years. And they got thirsty, and Moses asked the omniscient and all-powerful God, who designed humans who need water, about some water. And God said, why didn't you say so? Talk to that rock, and water will come out. Now, Moses hit the rock, as that was what he got asked to do the last time they had this problem. And this pissed off God seriously, since now it did not seem like a miracle anymore, and God is very insecure, so it has to look like a real miracle. And God said, because of this error you will not go to the promised land. And the promised land is the place where everyone blows each other up all day these days. Now, I think this is a metaphor. I think the 40 years in the desert are a metaphor for the search for truth. And the thirst is a thirst for wisdom. And the promised land is a libertopia where no violence is initiated and men do not coerce men. And the lesson is, you will not get to the promised land if you make a tiny mistake. It pisses off your true self. Right, let me know what you think about it. Bye bye.